Episode 91 of the Pilot podcast takes off now.
My name is Cheryll Cage, and I'm the founder of Cage Consulting, which is now Cage Marshall Consulting, and we do pilot interview prep.
Avination, what is going on? And welcome back to the Pilot podcast. My name is Justin Siems, and I am your host. Now, this episode is specifically for the pilot that wants to land that major airline job or that regional airline job or just the job of their dreams. This episode is with Cheryll Cage from Cage Marshall Consulting, and they help pilots like you get ready for those interviews. Now, interview prep can be very daunting. It can be very hard, especially when you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to prepare. You don't know what to expect. So why not spend the $700 or $500, whatever the price is, for this investment to get your career right, to get the job of your dreams? And think about this return on investment. You spend $700 now, that can turn into millions down the road. A lot of aviators have used this in the past and have had glowing reviews. So I highly recommend you listen to this with an open mind and consider checking out Cage Marshall Consulting, as this is some really cool stuff that we're going to be talking about with Cheryl. Now, if you like today's episode, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can check us out on our website, pilotthepilothq.com. Also want to give a shout out to our Patreon of the week, Ernie Harris. Shout out to Ernie for being the Patreon of the week. If you would like to be the Patreon of the week, head to our Patreon page, patreon.com/pilotthepilot. Thanks for all the support there. We also have some pretty cool stickers and t-shirts and swag out there as well. So go ahead and check it out. Avination, I don't want to keep any longer. I hope you enjoy this episode. So without any further ado, here's Cheryll Cage. Cheryl, what's going on? Welcome to the Pilot podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. This is kind of a cool interview. I've never done an interview like this before. I've never talked to someone about consulting, talked about interviewing, and it's such an important part to a pilot or just in the aviation industry is to interview well and make sure you have kind of all your ducks in a row to get that dream job you want.
Correct. It is.
Absolutely. Which
is why we've been around for 31 years.
That's amazing. And you can tell because I've talked to people that have used your services before and they've been very happy. But I kind of want to just dig in and get started. I want to know about the beginning. I want to know why. I want to know just like, why did you even want to start this company? What's the story behind Cage Marshall Consulting?
When I graduated from college, I had my degree in psychology, which basically gets you nothing. But my desire was to go into airline management. So I interviewed with the airlines. I became a flight attendant for Braniff International. I'm sure many people have heard that name or maybe haven't. We were the first major airline to go bankrupt. So that was interesting, but that's a whole nother story. After Braniff went under, I went into sales and marketing in another industry for a while. And I discovered that because I had made the transition fairly easily from aviation into another job, I had a lot of people asking me for advice. And so I kind of started this little, what I call a kitchen table business, where I'd sit down with a lot of my flight attendant friends and help them transition into something else. And then I really I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. And so as I received more requests, I thought, I think that there's a market for this. And, I enjoy doing it because it's really fun to help people reach their goals. So I kind of started a basic job search resume writing service. And I did that for a while, and then Eastern went under, Pan Am went under, and my husband worked for United Airlines for 35 years as a pilot. So we had a lot of aviation friends, and many of the Eastern pilots that we knew in the Denver area were getting preferential interviews with other airlines. And dinner parties and little outings and things, they were excited about the interviewing process, but I really sensed that they didn't understand what the interview was going to be. I think it was still more, I've got 10,000 hours, why would you not hire me? And sadly, none of these people were successful the first time they went in for an interview. So I reached out to about 7 or 8 of them and said, let's do some interview prep. I won't charge you for this. And we sat down and I taught them what I knew. And the great thing is that they all got jobs within the next year. And they were very surprised at what they didn't know about the process. So long story short, I started reaching out to other pilots. Of course, there were a lot of bankruptcies during that time because I started in 1988. And I put together my interview prep program in what I thought was a pretty good form, and I presented it to ALPA. And so I started doing all the ALPA workshops, the displaced pilot ALPA workshops, probably around 92, 93. And then in 1994, I wrote the book Checklist for Success, because I was getting so busy that a lot of the information that I had to present to my clients before we could even get into the nitty gritty of their interview prep, was taking 4 hours for me to deliver the same information. So that's why I sat down and wrote the book. And that's really how it blossomed. I mean, I was fortunate enough to see a niche, enjoy that niche, and it's been 31 years.
Yeah. So I got a question. Let's say Braniff Airlines is still operating today, never went out of business. You never were kind of faced with the crossroads of applying to new jobs, getting new jobs, and figuring out that you kind of had a skill in this. Do you think this would ever have come to, or do you think you would have stayed as a flight attendant the whole time?
I would not have stayed as a flight attendant. No. No, I mean, it's an interesting job and it's a fun job, but it was not really something that I saw myself long term. Now, I think I might have I would have pursued the airline management part, and I definitely have seen myself in that capacity. But I have to say, I really like working for myself. I like the fact that if I make a mistake, it's all me. But if I'm successful, it's all me.
All on you.
All on me.
Which is
Exactly.
Terrifying and equally as gratifying when it goes well.
Yeah. I am really, interestingly, a risk taker. I mean, not like jumping out of airplanes and stuff like that, but I'm okay with trying something new. And I think that that's why we've also adjusted so well to the changing industry. I mean, we were one of the first that did videos and DVDs. I started the small Cage Consulting publishing part of the company where we did, I sat down and thought about the kinds of books that my pilot clients needed. This is where I hired Ron McElroy to do airline pilot interviews and the mental math for pilots, which is still selling very well today. Checklist for Success has been updated probably 5 or 6 times. It sells as well today as it did in 1994. And I think, again, the fact that I'm always looking kind of for the next adventure. We've been able to keep our services, our approach, the way we teach our clients really fresh and as stress-free as possible.
Yeah, it's good because, I mean, like you kind of said earlier, everyone's kind of like, I have 10,000 hours. Why don't you hire me? And now there's so many kind of questions, formats, stuff that you have to do. And it can be a very stressful situation, especially since you don't know if you mess this up, if you'll get another opportunity. You get those emails, and then if you don't have everything they need at that right time, then you don't know when Delta, United, American, Southwest are going to check that, or you're going to go off on their radar again. So you need to be prepared for when you get that email. You need to be ready to go.
Well, it's interesting too. When we look back at our client base, it's interesting to me how many incredibly successful people we've had who have come to do interview prep with us, people that you would think there's no reason in the world that they would need interview prep. And I mean, like several years ago, we did the whole Blue Angels squadron. We've done generals. We've done, chief pilots for larger regional carriers. We've done just a myriad of really successful people within aviation. But the interesting thing is that when you think about it, the reason they're so successful is because they prepare. And so they're not assuming that they know how to interview, and they go out and they look for the knowledge. So it's I find that really interesting, and it's a point that I make when people say, well, I've listed all the questions and I kind of know what I want to say. I don't really need to do interview prep. And some people don't. I mean, but the point is that why wouldn't you? It's less stressful when you walk in there when you know what it is to expect. I mean, that's true in any kind of a situation, but especially when you're looking at a job that, could pay you millions of dollars over the course of your lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of think of it, what is the current pricing for it? If you don't mind me asking this way, I can kind of get my point across what I wanted to say.
Well, it's interesting that you asked me that because we're right in the middle of redoing our service format. As I said before, one of the reasons that I wrote Checklists for Success was because I couldn't physically deliver the basic information to my clients. I didn't have 4 initial hours to spend with everyone, basically just feeding them facts. So what we've discovered over the last year, Angie and I, is Angie Marshall, the president of Cage Consulting, who was my first employee back in 1992. And so now she runs the company. So we realized that reading the books is really important. And that's one of the first steps that we ask our clients to do, is to read Checklists for Success and Reporting Clear. And that's included in your services. But a lot of people, there's a lot of information in Checklist. And so what I wanted to do was to pull out some of the really highlights of interview prep and deliver that to them before they sit down with their consultant. So we're doing a series of on-demand videos. There's 4 in the series, and I have pulled out kind of the highlights of how to think about your stories, how to prepare yourself to be really present in the interview. And so we're going to ask our clients now to peruse the books, read them if they can, but before they have their first interview prep one-on-one with their consultant, we're requesting that they look at these videos. And they're not long. The 4 videos, I think the longest one is maybe 20 minutes. But I think that's really going to make a difference for them when they sit down with their consultant. And then we're also instituting within the next month or so, every week we'll have a live Q&A with our current clients. And that will be hosted by either Angie or I. And then we're also doing, making available our kind of library of FAQs so that people can, if they wake up at 2:00 in the morning and they think, oh my gosh, what about this? There's going to be a little seed of an answer for them until they can talk to their consultant. So we're adding a lot of kind of extra stuff, but it's going to make the whole process a lot easier for our clients. And we are looking at the pricing structure right now. But as it stands, the way we do it now, it's around $700 for our interview prep package. That probably will be going up some, but it's such an investment. And the service that we provide is really personalized, calming, if you will. And again, it's so wonderful to go into a big day like an interview knowing that you're prepared.
I mean, yeah, if you think about it, the initial $700 that you spend is an investment into your future, and it's an investment into the job of your dreams, especially when you're getting into major airlines and kind of the type of money that you can make with a major airline. When you look back on your career at age 65 when you're retiring and you see it was only $700 investment for you to feel prepared enough to get a job that will make you millions of dollars over your lifetime. It's kind of like you kind of laugh about it in the future, but I mean, $700 is a lot of money to a lot of people. So, I mean, it's definitely worth it.
Certainly it is. And again, just to be clear, the $700 is what we charge for our old services. I don't know what it's going to be in the future.
Right. Absolutely. And as things change and, products change, things go up, go down, whatever it might be. So
it won't be that much more, but you know how life goes.
How have you seen kind of airlines and the interview process change in your 31 career of doing this?
I really think that the biggest change came with the institution of cockpit resource management training. That was a huge leap, and one that caught the Pan Am and the Eastern and the Braniff pilots right in the middle, because there was that transition into behavior-based interviewing. Interestingly, the process is probably 90% the same, meaning, they ask you behavior-based questions, tell me about a time questions, what would you do if questions. They're still looking to learn about how you handle yourself in the cockpit, in the crew room, at the hotel. Are you going to be a positive influence as an employee? I mean, obviously, they've always been interested in the technical skills. And that's something that they're pretty good at figuring out, looking at, past training and upgrades and all these kinds of things. But, they're doing pretty much the same thing that they've been doing for the last 20 years. They certainly do a lot more, chair flying, if you will, scenarios, giving you a scenario and having you walk them through how you would handle that. But the kind of the philosophy behind it is still the same. You can, and this might be a good story to explain this. When I first started, I had these two clients in one day. And I was looking at their paperwork, and one of the individuals, and this was a long time ago, so they were still asking about things like parking tickets and that kind of thing. One of my clients had 2 parking tickets, and that was like the biggest thing on his application. And then my other client had an FAA violation. And I started my day thinking, oh, well, the parking ticket thing probably won't be a big deal. The FAA violation is going to be a bigger deal. And by the end of the day, after I'd met with them, I completely changed my opinion. The individual who had the FAA violation was so prepared to talk about what had happened. He provided all the paperwork. He concisely walked me through what happened, the mistake that he made. And he also talked at great length about, what he learned from it, and kind of resolved it for me. This is the letter that I received from the FAA, and, the end. The other client, I think we talked for 15 minutes about how stupid it was that there was a no parking sign in the place that this guy parked. And I was like, man, I wouldn't want this guy as my employee, because if he can't see his mistakes, that means that he's making them over and over again. Yeah. So they're really looking for, that individual that has great technical skills, but also has a great kind of a personality skills, if you will. And that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be an extrovert and a great joke teller and that kind of thing. But they do have to be someone that others are comfortable being around, want to be around, want to work around, someone who sees little problems and takes care of them before they become big deals. And so, there's lots of different personality types that have those attributes. So it's okay to be yourself, but you just want to be the kind of person that you'd want to work with.
Yeah, whenever people kind of ask me, I mean, obviously I'm not qualified to give any interview help or anything like that, but whenever people ask me like, hey, like, what should I do? What should I prepare? Is like, just be yourself. Like, I know that's like a very vague answer and like a very generic answer, but like, they're just looking to see if they can survive a 4-day trip with you. They want to have a good person that they know is going to be able to follow the rules, the SOPs that they have, that's going to be able to own up to their mistakes, that's not going to hide anything or lie anything, because they want to know that you can react to certain situations and know what you're doing and know why it's happening, know why it was wrong. Because they don't care if you have mistakes. Everyone has mistakes. No one is perfect. No one is really going to have that perfect record. And if you do, they might not want you, because that might be a red flag that something's wrong, right? So they want to see that you can change. They want to see that you can identify your mistakes, and they just want you to own up to them, I'm guessing, just not lie about them and kind of disclose everything on that application.
Well, and it's interesting because when someone says be yourself, it's amazing how many people don't know who they are. And this is one of the struggles with behavior-based interviewing. So if I were to say to someone, who wasn't prepared, tell me about a mistake you've made in the cockpit. Well, if I'm not prepared, what's the first thing that's going to pop into my mind? It's going to be the worst mistake I've ever made in the cockpit. And so what you're doing is you're giving your normal pattern of behavior as something really awful, when in fact, that worst mistake that you've ever made is not how you handle yourself on a daily basis. So one of the real guts of our program is the self-evaluation worksheet. And what I strive to do by developing this was to make people sit down and think about, how do I make decisions, and how have I gotten to the point where these are the steps that I use to make decisions now? How do I lead? How do I communicate with people so that, I don't blow little misunderstandings out of proportion? And these are the kinds of questions that we don't often sit and think about. And so if you sit down and you think about all the way from, high school to this morning, and you think about, gosh, what kind of successes have I had in decision making and leadership and being a part of a team? What mistakes have I made? And how have I improved? Then when you get into the interview and they say, tell me about a conflict you had with a captain, because you've done your self-evaluation and you've gone back and you've thought about all the people that you've worked with, you're going to have a whole basket of stories that you're going to be able to tell the interviewer that's going to allow them to see you in action. So, for instance, instead of going in and they say, what would you do if you saw your captain having an argument with a passenger, or you can see an argument is developing? A lot of people say, well, I would handle it diplomatically. Well, honestly, I don't know what that means. But if you say, well, the first thing I do is I probably go up to the captain and put my my hand on his back and say, Captain, I need to chat with you about the flight, in order to pull him away from that situation. That proves diplomacy. So those are the kinds of things that just don't pop up into your mind. You have to think about them. You have to think about all those mistakes. And this is not difficult to do, but it's time consuming. So the biggest problem that we have is when people don't give themselves enough time to prepare for the interview. It's really hard to prepare for an interview in 2 days, because what we're going to do is we're going to show you where you need to improve. But what that does is it makes the person panic. So, I always say that the longer you have to think about your interview, the better you're going to get at interviewing. This is a skill that you can develop. And it's not like cramming for an exam. Oh my God, I've got to know these 10 answers. And if I don't, cram the night before, I'm not going to be able to remember them. No, this is really a thought process. If how you handle decisions and conflicts and all these kinds of things is not clear to you, it is not going to be clear to the interviewer. And if it's not clear to them, then they're going to be sitting there going, I'm just not comfortable making a positive decision on this. So that's why this process is so interesting. And again, it's not difficult, but it is time consuming.
You brought up how you can't really prepare the way you should prepare in 2 days. Is there a specific amount of time that you recommend someone start the preparation?
If it were me, the second I started thinking about how I was getting ready to interview, or maybe even if, I've been at a regional for a year and I maybe think I'm going to give myself another 6 months or a year and then I'm going to start applying, I'd start the interview prep. I'd read checklists. I'd read Reporting Clear, which helps you go back and do all of your background information, because you have to be an expert on yourself when you go in there. The second you hesitate or don't know about, did you fail a check right? Or why did you get this grade in college? Or why did you not upgrade here? Blah, 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 blah. It just doesn't, you're not being your own best friend in the interview. So again, it takes some time. I would love it if all of our clients would have a minimum of, 3 months to prepare. A lot of our military pilots, start a year out, because they have a little bit more of a learning curve. Because if you've been in the military and you're making a transition into civilian, it's like a whole new world in a way. Yeah. So, and in fact, we are putting together with 3 retired military pilots a book about surviving your first year in civilian aviation, that's written specifically for retiring military.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, the more information you can have about, because every pilot's different, right? Like, you come from military, you come from civilian, like everyone has a different story, and everyone has different strengths and different weaknesses. So the more information that you can have at your fingertips to prepare for an interview such like this, that's the better. So more information is just great.
Absolutely.
So obviously you mentioned something about regional pilots preparing for major airlines and stuff like that, or the next airline they want to go to. Do you would you say your typical clientele is applying for the Delta, United, American, Southwest jobs, or does it start as soon as the regional jobs?
Yeah, we get a lot of people that are, coming off of long-term flight instructor jobs looking for regional or cargo, something like that. So it really is the flight instructor to a regional to majors, and military to majors, and sometimes to regionals. I mean, sometimes militaries, you have to go to regional depending on what the industry is like.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the time. Yeah.
Let's see. What was I going to ask? I just had a question. I blanked. What would you say? Actually, I'll ask this one. We talked about tell me about a time questions. Have they always been a process for the airlines to ask these questions, or is there like a specific reason behind them having to tell me about a time questions?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the reason that I developed the self-evaluation worksheet, because what they're asking, past performance denotes future performance. So if I can see how you handled yourself in the past, I'm going to have a comfort level with how you're going to handle yourself in the future. So that's why the tell me about a time questions need to be examples that show you in action. And I use an example that I had in my own career, even though it's not aviation, but I think it makes the point. A lot of times you'll get negative questions, like tell me about a time you failed as a leader. Tell me about the biggest mistake that you've made that taught you a good lesson. And in my situation, when I was a brand new business owner, I hired a woman to be our operations manager. So she was really the kind of front desk person, scheduling clients, that kind of thing. And she was fabulous. Clients loved her. It was really great. The problem is that she was also very, very sensitive. And so it was becoming an issue in the office with other employees. It was kind of like if I, as her boss, closed my office door, she would think I was mad at her. I mean, we've all known people like this. And I said to my newly business owner self, it's worth it to put up with that stuff because she's so good with the clients. This is embarrassing for me to say this, but about 18 months later, we had just a day where it blew up in my face. And, I didn't handle myself well. She started crying and quit. And she walked out of the office and I was like, oh my God, that was all my fault. I mean, I have hurt this woman's feelings. I feel terrible about this. And leaving her aside and how we patch things up, from that day forward, I realized that it was my responsibility to point out the elephant in the room. If I was going to own a business, if I was going to have employees that wanted to stay with my business, then I needed to lead in a positive and loving way, if you will. And so from that day on, if there's tension anywhere, I sit down, I have some coffee, we talk about it, and we come up with a solution. If I had done that with this woman, she'd probably still be working for me.
Right. So for the tell me about a time in that situation, you would have answered that with you identify the problem and how you would have improved that situation in the past?
Yes.
Okay. So say if I asked you that same question, how would you have answered a tell me about a time with me phrasing that question to you about that situation?
Pretty much the way I just delivered it to you. I set up the scenario. I was new. She was one of my first employees. She was great at her job, and so then I showed you the problem. And then I clearly described the mistake I made and then how I took the lessons and have improved. So one of the tips that people can do is that, and again, this is why it's so important to go back into the self-evaluation worksheet, because when you think about people that you've worked with, and that's a great way to come up with their stories, what captains have I worked with, flight instructors, students, you're going to remember situations that you had, and you're going to be able to place yourself back in that situation, almost visualizing it again. And then when you can visualize it, you can walk me through it in a chronological manner. A beginning, a middle, and an end.
Where do you think people go wrong with the tell me about a time questions? Do they try to focus on the problem too much and not the solution? Or do they not have their facts straight and kind of stumble on the story?
Yeah, they don't have their facts straight. They haven't done the correct preparation. A lot of people get into an interview and, they think, okay, I know what I'm going to say for this. And then they get in and they go, let's look back at the question that tell me about a time when you failed as a leader, and say I'm going to tell you this story about my employee. A lot of people would say, oh, I did a terrible thing and I feel really bad about it, but man, I learned a lot. I'm like, what are you talking about? So that's why you have to do that beginning, middle, and an end. You start at the beginning. I equate it to, when you're angry with someone and you're thinking, I'm going to talk to that person. And in your mind, you think about what you're going to say, but you don't really practice it. You just kind of know what you want to say. And then you get in front of that person and you open your mouth and it comes out all wrong.
Yeah.
That's kind of the same thing that happens in an interview. And that's why it's so powerful to sit down with someone that you don't know and that doesn't know you and do a mock interview.
Right. Agreed. Do you think, obviously, I'm not saying that like people do this quite often or whatever, but is it easy for an airline or the person interviewing to tell when you're fibbing or lying about something? Because maybe they're that is? Okay. What?
It absolutely is, because number one, aviation is an incredibly small world.
You got that right.
And one of the things that I tell my clients all the time is that I know you're going to talk to people. I know you're going to ask about what responses they gave in, for certain questions. But I really encourage our clients to do the self-evaluation worksheet first so that they understand that they have lots to talk about that's applicable in their own background. They don't need to use anyone else's story. And a lot of times people will go, oh yeah, my friend told me about this. That kind of happened to me. And if you didn't, it's, what's that saying? It's really confusing to tell lies because you have to keep everything straight. It's the same thing with your stories. If it didn't happen to you, how the heck? Yeah.
And you start saying random stuff like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's really funny.
Wait, that's not what happened. Wait a minute. What did happen?
That's funny.
Yeah.
Would you say that's one of the biggest reasons for not doing well in an interview is not knowing kind of what we talked about earlier is who you are and how to answer these questions and how to prepare? Or is there more of a specific thing that people just go in and they always stumble on that one question, or maybe their technical ability isn't to where it needs to be?
Well, I always tell clients that we need to put the technical and the HR completely separately, because I can help you, be your very best self in the HR part of the interview. But if you don't have the technical skills, you're not going to get hired. So we put that kind of aside. But again, this is a skill you can learn. You can learn how to talk about yourself. You can learn to deliver a response in a concise manner. You can learn all this. And, interviewers, if you're getting a call for an interview to be an airline pilot, whether it's a regional or a major, they want to hire you. They see something in you that is pleasing to them. So they're not going to waste their time interviewing people that don't have what they believe it takes. So you can stumble, you can mess up your stories, you can, make a mistake. But if you accept that and you recover well, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Where they will not give you the benefit of the doubt, and this happens a lot, is that when people sit down to do their applications, they don't take the time to do them correctly. And one of the mistakes that people make is that they'll pull out their Delta, their Southwest, their United application, and they'll do them all at the same time. Well, you're going to get confused. And you're going to do the flight time wrong. You're going to read directions for American and then, go fill out the United one and do the flight time wrong. I mean, you really have to do your homework. And if you don't do your homework, you're going to get an F.
And that F, what you're talking about, is not as forgivable as, say, you mess something up in the interview and they give you a chance to get that back, to get that trust back, to get that where they want to hire you back, that feeling back.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if you go in there and you stumble on a couple of questions, but you're not going to lose a job just based on that. You're going to lose a job if your application's wrong, if you go in there and you can't come up with any answers. If you go in there and every question they ask you, tell me about a mistake you've made, tell me about a time when someone critiqued you. And if you can't come up with responses or situations where you had that experience, because we've all had it, they're going to be like, what? Well, you're not being truthful with us.
When they ask us, tell me about a time questions, do they want every answer to be related to aviation, or can it be any kind of experience you've had in your life? So say if you're an athlete and you had a story from your time as being an athlete, or maybe a previous job that wasn't in aviation, or do they just want strictly aviation answers?
You have to listen to the question. But I would say that 90% of the time, I want you to 100% of the time, for every question, I'd like you to go in with an aviation example in your back pocket. But you absolutely, if you do volunteer work and they say, tell me about a time that, you really were a part of a team and you helped this team reach a goal. Well, if you did volunteer work, then go there. But the point is, the major point is that you want them to see you in action in the job that they're hiring you for. So, and that involves not only sitting in the cockpit, but being in the galley, being in the cabin, being in the crew lounge, being at the hotel. Those are all kinds of applicable examples of you being a pilot.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, yeah, obviously it's good to show them that in my mind, it's good to show them that you can do things outside of aviation too. So if you can have a good consistency, and if you can add maybe one or two stories outside aviation to show that you're involved, or to further their opinion of you and know that you're more than a pilot and that you can offer a lot.
Well, and going back to the question that you asked me at the beginning, how I've seen the changes, I would say that they are maybe a little bit more interested in the things that you're doing outside of aviation. But you want to be careful if they specifically ask it to be aviation and you have an example that you want to use from your volunteer work, you're not the one that's leading the interview. So you need to give them what they're asking for. There's a reason that they're asking for that.
So first is to understand the question and understand the type of answer that they want. Don't just come in thinking that you can just say, like you said, you have to understand what they're asking. If you give an answer to a question that they're an answer that they don't want, and you don't answer the question, then kind of leaves them with a bad taste in their mouth.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, even though the example might really show you in a great light, you're going to lose it because they're like, I didn't ask you that.
Yeah, you're like, what does it have anything to do with this?
What
Congratulations.
Yeah. With anything.
That's really funny. This is kind of off subject of that, but what do you say to someone? Almost every single applicant kind of has that embarrassing part that they never want to put on an application. Maybe it's a failed check ride. Maybe it's multiple failed check rides. Maybe it's a DUI, parking tickets, red light tickets, whatever it may be. What do you say to someone about making sure you disclose absolutely everything on your application, and why?
You can recover from almost anything. You can't recover from lying.
Okay. That's a good point.
You can recover from failed check rides. Like my client, you can recover from an FAA violation. You can recover from, failing upgrade training. You can recover from a lot of stuff. You cannot recover from lying, period.
I would agree. 100% agree. So yeah. So even though it might be hard, it's very important to disclose everything you absolutely know about yourself on that application, because I'm guessing eventually when they do their homework, they're more than likely going to find out the truth.
I honestly cannot think, never say never, but I honestly can't think of any client that had something really awful in their background that wasn't uncovered. And, I tell a lot of my clients that story about the 2 parking ticket guy and the FAA violation guy. And it seems to comfort them.
What do you say to the pilot that we kind of talked about, maybe that perfect pilot that's 23 years old, has 10,000 hours and flew a 767, has everything that the airline wants? What do you say to him when he is reading about this or listening to this podcast? He's like, I don't need that. That's for pilots that have had mistakes or don't know what to interview. How do you kind of go after that clientele? How do you convince them or even just tell them, hey, this is a good product for you as well?
Well, it's interesting. Number one, someone who would actually think that is going to have to fail once, and then they'll come back for interview prep. And I would say that probably, a certain percentage of our clientele come to us after they've failed an interview. And it's pretty easy to figure out why they failed if they're honest with us when we do the critique, when they tell us about their interview. But I would say also that 90 to 95% of those people go on to get a job. So that tells you that, unless you've murdered someone or something, if you've made a mistake and you can show improvement, you can clean this up.
That's good. Yeah.
It's really wonderful to meet someone who's incredibly successful, but also understands that they're human. Someone who's 23 and has a great background who says, oh, I don't need this. Well, they just need to learn to grow up a little bit. And
maybe that's what they need to learn from you guys. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's time to put the big boy pants on or big girl pants on, right? Yeah.
Or girl.
Yeah. Oh, especially big girl pants on. Yeah. Got to.
Right.
It's important. And I think everyone kind of goes through that in their aviation career, whether you're a guy or a girl. You kind of think you're on top of the world, and then something is going to happen to humble you, and you need to learn how to combat that. You need to learn how to handle that adversity, and that story is what's going to make that airline probably want you more, because you've been faced with adversity and you've come through and you've done well, and you were able to become a better person, better pilot, better friend, better spouse, better whatever it is, and that's what they want to know.
It's true. I had an experience when I first started this company. The first time that I did a couple of small seminars for ALPA, maybe 5 or 10 people in there. But then one day an airline went under and they had me come to Chicago to do a 2-hour presentation for 400 pilots. And I had never, ever done anything like that before. And I don't know what made me think that I wouldn't do something like that, because I had this ALPA contract. I got up there and I just bombed. And to make it worse, they videotaped me.
You're like, great.
I was like, oh my God. I mean, that flight home was so awful. I'm like, I will never, ever be able, they're going to fire me. Long story short, because my information was so good and organized, they gave me another chance. But honestly, I had to sit and watch that tape. It was the most painful thing I've ever done. But if I hadn't done that, stumbled and failed and went, this is not going to stop me, then I wouldn't be here 31 years later. So, adversity and failure is part of the whole process. But if you can say, okay, I failed, what do I do to fix it? And you reach out and you get the help that you need, 99% of the time you're going to be successful.
Yeah, I agree. What here's a question I don't know if you know off the top of your head. Maybe you can give me kind of a guesstimate, but is there a percentage of the amount of people who go through Cage Marshall Consulting that actually get the job? Or is it kind of, I don't know if it's 100%, 90%. I know it's all dependent on who that person is. I know you don't guarantee that they get hired, but this is
Right.
just to help them get hired. But do you have that off the top of your head, what that might be?
Well, the statistic that we give is the one where the percentage of people who come to us after they've failed an interview is about 95%. But I will tell you that we have a very high success rate. I'd have to ask Angie what that is. The people that fail, it has to do with something kind of egregious in their background that just can't be overlooked. It has to do with not being prepared, meaning your paperwork's a mess. You have not prepared yourself to answer questions. We can usually figure out why someone didn't get the job. And then we also have to look at the technical part of it. There's a lot of people that stumble with that. And then also the psychological testing. But again, I think it's telling that people that come to us after they've failed shows that you can learn and get better.
Yeah, I would agree. Have any airlines ever reach out to you, like kind of not necessarily partnering with you guys, but letting you know, like, hey, we really like when we see a candidate come from Cage Marshall Consulting, or do they not really have any idea that you guys are in the background kind of doing this?
Oh no, they know what everybody's doing.
Yeah, that's funny.
But I think, one of the interesting things is that years ago, when we'd probably been in business for 10, 15 years or so, we had a major airline come to us and ask us to do all their background checks. So we did that for probably, we did the contact for a year, and it was just not what we wanted to do. But I felt really good about the fact that they trusted us enough to come and ask us to be a part of their kind of interview team, if you will. I used to also do a lot of training for airlines, smaller airlines, on how to interview. I would train their interviewers. But yes, we get lots and lots of recommendations from interviewers at different airlines. It's interesting, a lot of people think that this is an easy way to, make money on the side. I'll start doing interview prep because I'm a pilot, or because, I used to interview pilots or something like that. And I've just seen so many people come and go over 31 years. And, we just keep our head down and do our work and continue to improve. Competition only makes us stronger. And I understand the responsibility of helping someone prepare for a job. This is not something that any of us take lightly or get irritated or are like, oh, forget it. I'm not going to, I've had it with this guy or this gal or whatever. No, this is really important stuff. And having gone through the bankruptcy of Braniff, having gone through, and you're probably too young to understand this, but the strike that the United pilots went on in 1985 to fight against the B scale. seeing so many of our friends with Continental, with Eastern, with Pan Am, and the struggles that they went through when they lost their jobs makes me really understand how important this is. And it's not just in aviation, it's in any career field, but this just happens to be my field. And I feel really good about the people that we've helped get back on their feet through our work. Especially those initial pilots that I reached out to, and I said, I'm so sorry that you went through this. Let's see if we can fix it.
You're helping them achieve their goal, and that's got to be pretty nice to see when you guys can share that victory together.
Yeah, it is. It's cool.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned a lot of the history that's happened in aviation, and you might have a good ability, or maybe you've pretty much seen the airline industry grow into what it is now. How do you view the future of aviation? How do you view the future of hiring, the future of airlines, the future of all that? What do you think that process is going to turn itself into? Do you think it's going to be more of a flow type thing that they have going on now, or do you still see hiring off the street and the hiring practices? How do you see that?
Well, it certainly looks like, there's a pilot shortage, and, it certainly looks like the flow through is something that's going to be looked at very, very carefully. I mean, it kind of makes sense. The military pilots will always be welcomed, off the street, if you will. This industry can change. I mean, the whole world changes, in a heartbeat. And, we weathered the storm after 9/11. I was flying back on 9/11 from DC, just having thrown a 50th wedding anniversary for my parents. And I was sitting on the airplane looking at our calendar for the month, and we had probably 200 clients on the books for September. And we all know what happened. And we went from 200 clients to 0 clients, and everything stopped. And, we weathered the storm. I wrote a book called The Resilient Pilot, which I just printed and published on my own. But it was, how do you weather the storm that we're in right now until you can get back in the cockpit? And, a lot of people had to do a lot of odd jobs to keep themselves afloat. I can't predict the future, but things hopefully will go well, and this will continue to be a really good career field for years and years and years to come. Well, I think we've had a pretty extensive conversation. I would ask people to come to our website, which is cageconsulting.com. And within probably by the end of January, we will have our new format up. And again, this is a new format of how we present the information. We're not changing any of the information. So if people have appointments with us now, they're getting the same process. But I do think that this is going to be an interesting kind of change, and I hope people will take some time. We're going to have a little marketing video there that shows me kind of walking people through what the process is. So we're going to have a lot of interesting changes over the next year.
Aviation, that is a wrap of episode 91 of the Pilot podcast. Like I said earlier, leave us a review on iTunes. Check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/pilot. Special shout out to Ernie Harris, Patreon of the week. Thank you, man. I appreciate all the support. And also go to our website, pilotthepilothq@gmail.com. If you would like to be on the podcast, or someone that should be on the podcast, email me, pilotthepilothq@gmail.com, and we will try to get it scheduled, try to get it figured out. We have some exciting podcasts coming up in the future, and 2020 is starting off great. Avination, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and as always, happy flying.